The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 teachers in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with the Tennessee academic standards. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu. This video is aligned with the following Tennessee academic standards.
Hello everyone. Hi. My name's Casey Olson. I am a 10th and 12th grade language arts teacher in South Central Montana, Columbus High School. And I teach 10th and 12th there. My 12th graders also take dual enrollment courses from me. So they get both high school and college credit for the class they take from me. I'm also a leader with the National Writing Project's College Ready Writers Program. And we've been working here in Tennessee with the Middle Tennessee Writing Project. They've been taking part in a study from about 2013 until 2015, both in Marshall and Warren County. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the research with that, but then also some of the materials, some of the resources that we've produced from that study. But I think it would be really good with the people that you're sitting with right now, introduce yourself if you don't know each other already, who you are, where you teach, what you teach. Just take a few moments. Okay, I wonder really quick, how many middle school teachers are in the room? Okay, how many high school teachers? And how many non-English teachers? Everybody's an English teacher. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Oh, you got one?
Oh, no, I'm an English teacher.
You're an English teacher, and you're an alternative?
I teach one class that's leadership.
One class leadership.
Two that are English language.
Okay. Anybody teach social studies? Okay. All right. So with the National Writing Project, our mission is to focus the knowledge, expertise, and leadership of our nation's educators on sustained efforts to improve writing and learning for all learners. Okay. And our vision is that writing in its many forms is the signature means of communication in the 21st century. NWP envisions a future where every person is an accomplished writer, an engaged learner, and an active participant in a digital, interconnected world. And there's some important pieces of that right there that we're looking for a future where every person is an accomplished writer. So this program that I'm going to be talking about today sets out to contribute to that every student leaves school feeling like an accomplished writer, okay? That every citizen is an engaged learner. Fits in with lifelong learning goals and things like that. And then also that last bit, that an active participant in a digital interconnected world, that students aren't just taking information and holding it, that they're actually doing something with that information, okay? So that's why we care so much about argument. With the study that took place with the Middle Tennessee Writing Project, that was part of a larger study with the National Writing Project. The study took place in 10 states. There were 44 school districts involved across those 10 states. And there was like 25,000 students who were a part of it. 400 teachers were a part of that study. The funding for the study was primarily, it came from the U.S. Department of Education's Investing in Innovation Fund. It was an I-3 grant with matching funds from the Rural School and Community Trust and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So as a rural teacher myself, that's how I got involved with this and found myself on the leadership team. They were awarded the grant in 2012. It was a validation grant, which means that the National Writing Project was awarded the grant based on past success in previous grants. They were successful in previous grants, so this was validating that success by allowing them to push further and see what they could come up with. I mean, you're talking like almost 700 applicants for those I-3 grants, and 7 grants were awarded, and the National Writing Project was one of them. So it was highly competitive, and part of the requirement for conducting this study was, for taking part in the grant, was to conduct an independent evaluation with a multi-site randomized control trial. So they had 2 independent research organizations studying what the National Writing Project was doing, and what in the context of Tennessee, what the Middle Tennessee Writing Project was doing, both in Marshall County and then later here in Warren County. So the goal of the study was to improve middle and high school teachers' practice in the teaching of writing. It was also to improve writing achievement for middle school and high school students, and then as a byproduct of that, increase the number of teacher leaders prepared to teach that. So, as an extension of that third goal, here you all are being developed as teacher leaders on this subject matter, and there's some of you who already have some experience with that in the room as well. So like I said, 10 states, 44 rural school districts, 400 teachers, 25,000 students, and these were the 10 states that the U.S. Department of Ed asked us to work in. Primarily, they were looking for districts. For the districts to qualify, they had to have 50% or greater like free and reduced lunch numbers, or high poverty indicators among their student population. Because if this program was going to work, it needed to work with all students in all locations. And so we had the study going in upstate New York, clear down to southern Arizona, and all the other locations there. 36% of the students involved in the study were students of color, but that's an average across all those 44 school districts. Some of those school districts were very homogeneous. There was 97, 98, 99% European American students. There was that same range with African American students. There was that same range with Hispanic students. So 2/3 of the students were eligible for free or reduced lunch across that study, but we hit some districts where it was approaching 98, 99% free and reduced lunch. And then, there was a common challenge, that last bit there. 31% of the districts experienced teacher turnover. And in some of those districts, it was substantial. In some of the districts, like Teach for America, where the teacher might be there for a year, and then at the start of the next year of the study, it was an entirely new teacher. So the materials and the professional development had to incorporate that. It still needed to work, even in conditions of high teacher turnover. So it had to be an accessible program that could be picked up and used in a lot of diverse ways across the diverse challenges in rural America. Three core components of the study and the materials produced. It was an intensive, customized professional development led by teachers. We have teachers in the room who led that professional development. It was developed to impact these rural areas. It was developed to impact these areas of high teacher turnover. And then also high quality teacher created adaptable curriculum materials. I'm going to go through a little bit of that, but I was involved with the development of some of those materials. And then what I'm here to present to you today about community research projects is an extension of that. That's one more teacher-made curricular resource that can be put to work in the classroom that is informed by the research that took place. And then also that last bit, it was really important, the formative assessment tools that were created as part of the process. Middle Tennessee Writing Project is very experienced with all three of those components. And there are teacher leaders who are very experienced with that. And any part of that I don't cover today, Middle Tennessee Writing Project has people that can help you if you're interested in any of those components. Study had three goals, and it was successful. At the end of 2015, the research came back and showed that the writing project was successful in improving teacher practice. It was successful in the achievement that the students were experiencing as a result of that professional development, and a large amount of capacity for teacher leadership was created. And those, like I said, some of those teacher leaders are here in the room. But this is the pattern that arose from the successful locations in the study. In areas of the study where the student writing achievement came up, where teacher practice, where teachers felt like they were more experienced teaching argument and teaching writing, this is the pattern that arose. And routine arguments to mini units to extended argument. But the big thing is that beginning, that routine argument, where teachers are helping students just find what argument is, really non-intrusive ways, low impact ways of just engaging with argument. How many of you have had a chance to work with any of the College Ready Writers Program materials already? A few of you? Okay. Anybody taught a mini unit yet? Okay, a few of you. Okay. So we'll have more time to look into that, and again, the Middle Tennessee Writing Project is very experienced working with all three of these. But let me tell you a little bit about routine argument. Routine argument is just like daily ways of incorporating argument. And we've talked about it like routine argument. We've also talked about it as daily argument, where you can maybe take 5, 10, 15 minutes of class and incorporate writing on a daily routine basis. And with my own experience, as I was trying this out in my own classroom, I found that if I could just take like 5, 10 minutes a day, I could really create a culture of argument. And it would be things like having students do quick writes in response to an image of a billboard. One of the billboards that I use frequently, it says text and drive, and it's an advertisement for a funeral home. So I'll flash that up on the screen for 30 seconds. I'll ask the students to formulate an opinion. What's your reaction? And it'll get them to respond immediately, take a position, and make an argument. And so like I can do that in 5 minutes in my class, and then I can go on and teach other things. But through just like routine practice of just always incorporating ways for students to figure out what argument it is, but also just engage with argument, I can really create a culture in my classroom, a writing culture, but also an argument culture that gets students used to talking about issues. If I can incorporate a little bit of time where they get to turn and share with one another about what they just wrote about in that 30 seconds, in 30 seconds, write about it. And that's really low impact, right? And then you have time to share. And it might be 2, 3 sentences for some students, and that's okay, because that 30 seconds is accessible for most students, okay? Mini units, as you start to watch, you're incorporating routine argument into your classroom. As you start to watch, you might start to see that students are ready to learn some specific skills when it comes to argument, like how to incorporate source material into their writing. How do they quote source material? So one of the very first mini unit is making informal arguments that teaches them the balance between what the text says and what I have to say. So that's a great starting point. I've seen teachers use that at middle school very readily, but then they also, I've used it at the 10th grade level early on in the process. When I was trying to learn it, I used it at the 12th grade level. So they're very accessible, they're very flexible, but they are focused on specific argument skills. And they span like 4 to 6 days. So if you can create a window of 4 to 6 days, you could really target a specific skill. How to figure out if a source is credible or not. How to rank the evidence, like which evidence seems more important and relevant to what I'm trying to say. On into how to make sense of an argument where there are multiple perspectives, more than 2, and sort through that. And how do you come to understand sources that you disagree with in ways that aren't manipulative, and in ways that are really, I'm just trying to understand what they're saying so I can make a really strong argument and maybe even change their mind, okay? In areas of persuasion, but also, sometimes students, when they disagree with a text, if they really work to understand it, they might come to find that they actually agree with it. Or actually, it might be more complex than that. They might agree with part of it. So, there's a lot of skills involved. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how I use one of those mini units to do this larger extended argument. An extended argument is that next step. Once students have a culture of argument in the classroom and they've learned specific skills, then they might be ready to take it up a notch. So extended argument, I guess the easiest way to kind of put out there and establish what it is, it would be like if you could take the traditional research paper that's taught in a lot of English classrooms, if you could transform that into an argument, that is what an extended argument is. And so that's often a great place to start. If you already have a traditional research paper that you incorporate into your teaching, that would be a great place, not to make extra room for another project, but maybe make some tweaks to that project, then to make space to give students more time to, number one, get really informed about a topic, more than 4 to 6 days, maybe like a quarter or like 4 or 5 weeks, okay? What I'm going to show today with community research projects is an extended argument. It's very flexible. I use a quarter, and then I might take a break in the middle of it and teach a mini unit to help students with a specific skill that they need next. But they might not know how to use it and how they need it until I front load some more information and they do some research. Okay, so I use that energy. Any questions on what I've said so far? Okay. Is this making sense? Okay. So SRI's report from the study of the College Ready Writers Program talked about the implementation, how the program had a positive, statistically significant effect on the 4 attributes of student argument writing: content, structure, stance, and conventions. And in particular, CRWP students demonstrated greater proficiency in the quality of reasoning and the use of evidence in their writing. So in comparing schools where the teachers received professional development to schools where teachers didn't receive professional development during the study, the students in the schools where teachers received professional development had a higher capacity for content, structure, stance, and conventions. They also had higher quality reasoning, and they used evidence more frequently and at a higher level. Okay, that's important, statistically significant from a research standpoint. You would not believe how rare it is for professional development in school to impact student work. And I say that as a professional development provider up in front of a room right now, okay? It is very rare for professional development to show up in student work. And so, now it's going to jump way ahead, isn't it? Yeah. So my hope is that, some of you have already taken up this material, you're trying it out in your classroom. My hope is that the rest of you will find Middle Tennessee Writing Project as a source to go to look into these materials so you can try this in your classroom. And then I hope that you might give this extended argument project a try. If you feel like you've already got some argument culture going in your class, you've got maybe you've taught a mini unit or two, this might be accessible. But know that the scale of this project, you might want to go to the Middle Tennessee Writing Project and learn more about routine argument, learn more about mini units, so that this might be more accessible to your students with what I'm about to propose, okay? So one thing that we've seen definitely through the success of that study with CRWP is that it obviously stands, the C stands for college, College Ready Writers Program. But as we've gotten more into this, that the idea that students can have evidence for what they say, they can back up what they say with evidence and reasoning, that works in other locations as well. That would work in career fields. It's really important to be informed. I want my doctor to be informed, right? I want my mechanic to be informed. I want them to be able, my students, whatever field they go into, I want them to be able to go out, lifelong learners, keep informing themselves, keep themselves up on the latest research that pertains to what they do. That's important, to have evidence for why they do what they do. But then also community. There's a bit of civic engagement. There's a bit of citizenship in being informed. And here we are in election season. It's important to be informed. It's important to make evidence-based decisions. So the idea of what that C stands for in CRWP has grown. And that's what I'm here today to talk about. So routine argument mini units, they support students on the way to all of those ends, the college and the college ready writers, but I want them to be career ready, and I also want them to be community ready when they graduate from high school. And we all play a role in that from 6th grade on. And I know my kids are in the primary grades right now, and I can see it already happen. I can see what the teachers in my kids' school are preparing them with, and I can see that long trajectory, okay? And actually the College Ready Writers Program, they just applied for another I3 grant, and if they're awarded that bit, it'll scale up to like 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So we're looking at impacts sooner in the trajectory of a student's education. So if I think about this for me, and there are teachers all over the country studying this, and I've been talking to teachers in very urban areas as well. Teachers all over the country in rural, suburban, and urban areas. When I think about what this provides my students in a rural area, I mean, we've got one traffic light in my county, and it flashes yellow all the time. So we'd be lucky to get 350 high school students together from my county in one room if we included all 5 small towns that are in the county. I mean, it's a very small area. So my students feel like they're far away from those conversations. Yes?
Is this like the antithesis of like a Socratic seminar, in the sense that it's less just about discussion about things, it's more about an issue, it's on a focus of where they're debating more, is it? Do you involve, do you mean like debate by argument?
That's a part of it. And I use Socratic circles as part of routine argument. Mm-hmm. So we'll do a common reading. Students will I don't know, I was just thinking that it is less argument and more discussion, isn't it? You're trying to get away from argument and having an opinion as such, as rather than just low stakes discussion. Right. So early on, yes. But I want it to be accessible. So we might, the very first mini unit, the subject matter is the text set. We call it a text set. So we have multiple texts gathered together on reality television. There's another one on sports drinks, very accessible, And part of the focus there, that I know this from my own classroom, it's accessible, but they're not so emotionally connected that they aren't learning the skills.
Okay.
Because if they jump in with high impact argument, like high impact issues, like the election, immigration, gun control, they become so emotionally invested in the subject matter that they don't learn the skills. And it's really important to learn the skills. And I have another extended argument that helps my seniors delve into those really like hot button issues. It's called the position paper. And that's accessible on the website as well. But that's something that I think the teachers that I work with find works better with like 11th and 12th graders specifically. And then we have another extended argument specifically for middle school students that's being developed right now by Terrence Sanders that will be available. So those of you who have been with the program, you'll know who he is and what he does. But he works, he was teaching extended argument with 7th graders, having students do like in-depth research and formulate argument. So back to your earlier question, Socratic seminars, Socratic circles is a great way for students to learn to talk with each other in respectful ways, so that we get past this idea of argument as anger and shaking fists at one another, and that we engage each other through questions, which is also related to inquiry. Okay, so I use like a common text and have students annotate that text, write questions, comments in the margins of that text. And I really focus on questions, and we come together and we start a discussion, and we keep the discussion going through asking each other the questions. And if somebody's left out, if somebody's not participating in the conversation, my students pick up on the skill of posing a question specifically to the student who's silent in the room. That's part of building that culture, right? And it's College Ready Writers program it's really important to build up that culture of generosity as you talk about.
So you're saying they're both as important, just different skills that they're
Right.
these two different.
Right, and when they integrate together, it's a really dynamic process,
Yeah.
right? But the truth is that we learned this from the study, and it was true here in Warren County, it was true in Marshall County as well. Whether schools were receiving professional development or not, where we started across the country, there just wasn't much writing happening in rural schools, and there's. That has a lot to do with No Child Left Behind. It took emphasis away from writing, and we had to focus on other things. And that was true for my state as well. So it's also true that many students show up at college and are not prepared to write at a college level. And colleges are like losing funding. In my state especially, our colleges are having a really tough time funding-wise, but at the same time, they're having to fund faculty to teach intro to college writing because students aren't prepared when they show up. So, that's important for me as I am looking at what my seniors can do when they graduate, and knowing that it starts before they become seniors, that there's kind of a steps I can take. And if I only have that chance, then I take it when they're seniors. But if I have an opportunity with my 10th graders. I have a colleague who uses this with middle school students. And so now this is the first year I'm receiving sophomores that have had experience with College Ready Writers program material before they arrive to my class. And I'm amazed. There are things that I'm doing with my sophomores that I'm having to do with my seniors this year. I'll flip that. There are things that I'm doing with my seniors this year that I'm already able to do with my sophomores, because they're in a different place than that senior class was when they were sophomores. So, once this gets rolling within a school, the students can really surprise you with what they're able to do. But as far as rural students, it would be my perspective, and I would put that out there to you to see what you think. But I feel like my students often feel like they're far removed. So if we take an issue like immigration doesn't affect Montana students all that much. They have opinions about it, but they don't have much experience to be informed, and yet they don't have the knowledge of how to go about getting informed either. So they feel disconnected from that. But then on the flip side, rural perspectives are often ignored in national conversations. So they feel that, they internalize that. and this is, College Ready Writers Program is a way that students can learn to, with generosity, with humility, enter into those conversations, make them in logical, rational ways, and make them so that people will listen and maybe even change their mind about the topic that that student's talking about, because the student can convey how much information they hold on the topic, how much time they've put into becoming informed. So that's my goal. So I developed what I call the Community Research Project. And I do this with my sophomore class, but I've designed it so that it could be done anywhere from 6th to 12th grade. And I was inspired by a book called Teaching Argument by George Hillix. And I believe chapter 3 in that book, he talks about policy arguments. And he gives a really great example from a 5th grade classroom. So if this can work at 5th grade, it can work in middle school, it can work in high school, okay? But he gives an example of students involved in a policy argument, and it's a class that is really upset in this school about, the administration has banned chewing gum in the classrooms. And the students are really upset about it. So the teacher takes up the opportunity to use that emotional energy that students have over that to transform that into an argument project. So the first thing that she has them do is become informed on the topic. They have conversations about it. She asks the principal to provide them with a written explanation as to why it was important to ban chewing gum in the school. So that becomes the counter argument when the principal provides that. Then the students read that, they talk about it. They're still emotionally upset. They really want to emotionally argue with the principal, but they don't have the data, they don't have the information yet. So she reveals that to them. They invent their process, and what they come to is the students design a randomized controlled survey of the school where they select a number of classrooms at random. They draw them out of a hat. They go into those classrooms and count the number of gum wads stuck underneath the desks in those classrooms. They can average that by the number of desks in the classroom to find out on average how many gum wads are underneath each desk. Then they can apply that ratio to the entire school. And then she says, we need to figure out an impact, okay? So they go talk to the custodian, and they find out how long it takes the custodian to clean one gum wad in the summer. They ask her salary, and they calculate the amount of time by the hourly wage, and they come to, it's something like 12 grand. It costs the school each summer to remove gum wads off of all the desks. And so then the students come back in with that information, and they have, and I've seen this on a number of different topics. They come in and they're like, well, what do we do with that? They're never going to let us chew gum again. How do we convince them to let us chew gum, but also convince the students not to stick gum under desks? And now it's a more complex issue. And then a student has an aha moment and says, why do students stick gum under desks? I wonder if they do that because they're afraid of getting caught with the gum that's been banned. So they survey their peers. And they find out that most of the peers are really afraid of getting caught, so they stick the gum under the desk. So they make the argument that the school could save a ton of money if they just let students chew gum, and they inform the students on why it's important not to chew, or why it's important for students not to stick the gum under the desk. And so I thought that was a brilliant process that teacher went through. And if you've got standards, there's so many standards that the students are hitting. There's so many levels of critical thinking wrapped up in that. And here it is happening at a 5th grade classroom, and I wasn't giving my sophomores and my seniors opportunities to do that same thing. So I wanted it to come up with something that students could really contribute and know more about their local community, because it's also true in rural areas that the sustainability of rural communities, it becomes tough when kids graduate and move away, and you're not sustaining that population. There's a lot of towns around where I teach. Like I said, one traffic light. We're a big county. size-wise, but not population-wise. We're very sparsely populated. So it was important for my students to learn about their local area and the issues that it faced. And I thought if they could become invested in those issues that affect our local community, they would be more connected to that place and care more about it. And even if they did move away, they'd still know that, you know, that was an important place too. That I didn't, and it, just the self-esteem of a rural community, to have everybody engaged in that community, to care about that community and the you know, the status and the future of that community, even if they do move away. So in 2015, I started this, and I had students just think of issues that you know of, or issues that your parents are talking about, or issues that your boss at work is talking about. And then we read the local paper. I pulled together several issues of the local paper. We went on the local paper's website, read through issues, and just gave students multiple entry points to become informed on what issues were people in the community facing. Some of them like immediately knew. They immediately knew what they wanted to talk about. Some of them, they weren't quite sure. That student who just moved into the community wasn't really sure what to do, so I tried to then like maybe partner that person up with somebody who did have a strong idea of what they wanted to do, because then that gave that student an opportunity to learn more about the local community and feel like they were a part of it. And that's worked really well. I've seen a lot of students who are new to the community become more established in the school and in the community through that work. So these are some of the projects they took on, dropout rates and alternative ed. Our county courthouse is rapidly approaching 100 years old, and one corner of it is 6 inches lower than the rest of the building. It's sinking. And so there's a big question. I mean, do they go through this multi-million-dollar project to restore this historic building, or do they tear it down, build a new one? They're to the point where they can't put any offices on the top floor because of the weight. And so there's a lot of issues around that. So that was one that we talked about. And the courthouse is like kitty corner right across the street from the school. The backpacks in classrooms had recently been banned in our school, and we had talked about that 5th grade example from the George Hillock's book. So a couple students wanted to take that on. How to address irrigation water theft. So there's a student whose father is on the water board, and he's hearing from his dad about how people are often putting in water pumps into the irrigation ditch that don't have water rights. Okay, and I don't know what water rights are like in Tennessee, but in Montana that's a really touchy issue with farmers and ranchers if somebody's stealing water. Because there's people down the line of the ditch that need that water. We have a railroad crossing that is we have an intersection with a railroad crossing right next to it, and it's like the main street. It's like the main intersection in town, and it causes some problems, especially when a train comes through and blocks up traffic. The benefits of a school auditorium, we don't have one of those, and I had some students involved with like speech and drama in the band that thought that would be really important, and we're in the process of looking at building a new middle school. So they were thinking like somehow maybe the auditorium could be included in that. Dangerous conditions on rural roads. And then similar to here in Warren County, my Columbus, where I teach, is right in the center of the county. And there's a advanced life support ambulance service that's right there in town. But if you live out on the edges, because we're such a large county and because it's so sparsely populated, you might be 2 hours away from advanced life support. And so I had a student in the classroom whose father was the fire chief in town who wanted to expand that service out and get funding from the county to do so, and had been having trouble with it. And so his son picked up that same cause and started looking into it and researching it. So, I mean, a lot of these topics are very personal for the students. And that's an energy that can be harnessed to help them then learn or put to use those skills that they've been learning through the mini units. They can turn around and like put those right to work. This year, or this previous spring, Students took on county funding for our county museum. Our county museum did not receive any county funding, and they're constantly working. The director is constantly working to get funding from donations and private donations. Parking on Main Street. So that's kind of connected to that railroad crossing, but then parking is an issue because when all the traffic backs up, it's really hard to get out of a parking spot. Need for sidewalks and crosswalks. You know, that we don't have many sidewalks in our town. The drug use in our school, start time, bullying, dress code, suicide rates in Montana. Montana is #1 in the country for suicide rates, and we've been in the top 5 for 40 years. So that's not a topic that I anticipated, but I had 3 students who had each written that down, and so I just put them in a group together and said, okay, this sounds important, why don't you figure that out and work together. So that happens too, like as we talk about it, like groups will form, groups will break up, but I just try to like guide them. I try to, I come in alongside them and I talk to them like they want to form a group of 4, and I have to remind them, hey, if you're going to be a group of 4, this topic has to be worthy of a group of 4. You're going to need a topic that 4 people have a lot to do with, that 4 people can all contribute to. And if you're not able to do that, I'm going to warn you right now, like you might want to think about maybe splitting off. Or are there multiple topics within this larger topic that you're thinking of that maybe you could split off and research independently? So I really try to stay flexible in the beginning, but I try to allow students to try to find their own topic that they're really invested in, and then also make their own groups. But then sometimes if students are left out or don't know what to do, I try to step in and like make connections and say, okay, hey, would you mind if so-and-so joined your group and took part in this? So I have a few handouts here. And I'm going to ask you to make a quick list here really quick before we dig into the handouts. I'm wondering what's going on here. And just a quick list. What's going on here in this community? What local problems or difficulties are residents of Warren County facing? So just let's take 2 to 3 minutes and just try to brainstorm some issues that students might take on here. What do you know about personally? What have you heard about? What are people talking about? What's been in the newspaper? If you're not from Warren County, brainstorm issues from your community. Make it personal to you. What have you heard? What are people talking about? What have you been reading?
I did a list of in Mount Pleasant, the divisive board. What's the name? We're having trouble with boards today. Our governing board. The dump issue, where they've got that toxic dump.
Yeah, that's true.
And so I was thinking of things that were important to them, like the fact that some of our kids are in drama club, and we have an auditorium, but we don't have a sound system that works for that auditorium. So when we do those projects and those plays, nobody can hear them. As well as the hot button issues of dress code and piercings, hair color, with all the new trends that are coming in. The kids want to do it and express themselves, but yet the teachers are, fighting against it somewhat, and some of the parents, and so those kinds of issues would relate to it.
What to do with the former Greer Stadium where the Nashville Sounds played. Traffic on 440 has become impossible. So what to do with that, especially in a branch that I went off that was, can there be a mass transit addition to Nashville that'll help that problem? In Nashville, we're struggling with continuing failing public schools, and then vouchers and charter schools competition.
One of our major issues was that there was no drama arts curriculum. That the kids were coming from the middle school, which was for the performing arts, visual and performing arts, and then they come to the high school and there was nothing. So there was nothing was. So the community came together and went to how many meetings with the Board of Education and really fought for a drama teacher, a dance teacher, and we've got them this year. Mm-hmm. So but it was always an issue for them. But just emphasising how important they are within not only a community but within the schools, and just for certain kinds of kids, arty kids. They are always represented. there are no jobs, no work opportunities, and I feel as if that's a big thing that sort of within the community that we could really do something about. But they're bringing in, I've heard, the whole concept of bringing in the new principal and all that is so that it will attract new industry.
And I like the way that he broke this down into parts. And so I was thinking, like, we could even do, like, each part, like the introducing the issue and the research and the methods, like, we could figure that stuff out their sophomore year and then start doing the research or the actual experiment their junior year, and then their senior year could just be, like, the composition and the finding of it.
I wonder if we could come back together real quick. And I want to hear from your tables. What did you all talk about over here? What issues stood out? Which one seemed to have the most to talk about? No pressure.
We had the dog issues because outside the county there's no leash laws. There's a huge problem here with people dropping their dogs. They don't pay to have them spayed and neutered. They aren't paying to have the shots and so forth. We have a lot of issues with dog bites. So you could break that into multiple facets.
Excellent. That'd be a great topic.
I think one that's important to our school, you said it, but we're the nursery capital of the world, and we have water runoff and really high cancer rates, extraordinarily high cancer rates. So, I mean, it touches even our school population.
Oh, that'd be an excellent topic for students to look into. Thank you. Over here, anybody?
I was talking to some former colleagues of mine, and we have a rotating schedule, a 7-day rotating schedule, which our teachers absolutely love. And you see a difference in the kids. I feel we have less discipline problems, or I know in my experience, compared to my experience in the former county. And I was just trying to explain to my friends that, give it a chance, be open-minded to it, because it really is worth trying. And so they just had some opposition and that type of thing. But we've always said, if I had my 7th period class in the morning, I'd probably see a huge difference, and you do.
Yeah, absolutely. When we get into it, you should take a look at the school start time research, and it's not like directly like the same topic, but the way those students went about collecting their research would be a similar way that students might collect research on that. The impacts of switching schedules up and looking into that, and looking into how other schools are doing things to maybe make changes within their school.
I live in Nashville, and some of my ideas were as fun sounding as we used to have a baseball team, and they moved stadiums, and we have an old stadium that's really dear to our hearts, and what to do to that stadium. And then also on the other side of that, just the traffic that Nashville has been accumulating and different ways of dealing with that, because it's super controversial right now.
Excellent topics. Excellent. We have some topics here that.
We have a lot of challenges with at-risk kids. Well, I guess in any school district, we've got a local group, the Boys and Girls Club, that everybody's familiar with, and they've had a recent merger and restructuring, and they're very important in helping our schools with at-risk kids. So there are many issues that could be addressed that would be a good partnership.
Excellent. Any others that were near and dear to your heart?
Yeah, the drama arts curriculum was a big fight at our school, but the parents won the argument, which was great. So this year we've got a drama teacher and we've got a dance teacher, and they're really making a focus on that now. So that's good.
Excellent.
The big issue at our school right now is fundraising. The fact that all of the red tape you don't even know about that comes up when you try to raise funds. We had our fundraiser shut down a week before it was scheduled to take place. So because someone went to the superintendent with a law that, anyway.
And one thing that I've noticed with my students, sometimes they'll come up with topics that they're very emotionally invested in, that they're very upset about, like the gum chewing issue would be one of them. And Hillock says in the book that the gum ban didn't get changed, right? And that's something students need to accept going in. But the more I've done this, the more successes we have had. So students also know that that's a possibility. They accept that change might not happen, but they'll get heard. But then they also, they hold out hope that they might be one of those, if they can make a really rational argument, if they can collect enough evidence, they can make a rational argument for this. But sometimes students also change their mind on a topic. They set out with a position, they're upset, they're emotionally wrapped up in it, but then as they start to get more information, that changes. But then those students can also work to inform the public in the same way that they just became informed. So there are many different outcomes that can come from like brainstorming just topics. So it's really important to get students involved with topics. I'm going to direct you next to the blue handout that I put out there. Hope everybody had a chance to collect one of those. Looks like it. So this handout works, and I've got some theory here. I'm going to present some of my own evidence as to why this handout is important. This handout is the one that I give to my sophomore students. So now you possess that, and you can recreate that and adjust it how you see fit. But one of the first things that I am looking for is I really want my students to become positive and solution-oriented when it comes to community issues. I think that rather than divisiveness, if my students can learn a process by which to become informed and seek out positive solutions, that they and we're all contributing to our community in positive ways. And we can actually, like I just said, inform the public on positive solutions that would fix these issues, rather than just like, I think I heard somebody talk about the venting on Facebook. That's the antithesis of what we're trying to talk about. We're trying to get students to be able to unpack those vents on Facebook for what they are, and also work to get informed and make rational, reasoned arguments that will fix the issue. So I love this quote from Deborah Tannen from The Argument Culture, Stopping America's War on Words. She says, "Often the truth is in the complex middle, not the oversimplified extreme." And I use that one a lot with my students. My students and I start to talk about the complex middle. Is that an extreme view, or is that more of a complex middle view? Because they come very quickly through the process of the culture of argument, working through those argument skills. They come very quickly to realize that argument and issues can be complex. And that doesn't mean we just steer away from them. That means we have to do complex thinking. And it has been so beautiful to watch rural students see complexity as a benefit and as something to actually enjoy. And so we use that quote a lot. All right, so the next quote comes from this book. It's called They Say, I Say by Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein. If you're interested in that, this is a great one. And that Making Informal Arguments, if any of you have taught that reality TV mini unit, there's a lot in that mini unit based on this text. But in there, in the preface, it says, schools and colleges need to invite students into the conversations and debates that surround them. These are college writing, college composition faculty saying this. This is something that we need students coming into college to be able to do. But then you also see that community issue piece attached to it as well. They need to be able to engage with what surrounds them and take part in those discussions and those debates. And then this came from some schmo named Casey Olson in a blog post last week. They actually published my blog post on the U.S. Department of Ed's blog. And I guess if I could wrap it up, like this whole idea of why this is important, this is my sentence. It's positive solution-oriented citizenship is the cornerstone of a well-rounded education. If I think about what I want for my students for the day after they graduate, what I want them to be able to do, the best of what I want them to be able to do, I tried to put into this community research project. And I have lots of standards about like evidence and conventions and all that, but I've seen that I can teach that, and I can teach that in very personal ways to students where they retain it. Okay, I can check off all my standards boxes. Okay, my students, I watch them grow and become able to do what they need to do. And I'm going to show you student samples today, and these early samples, you're going to see my classroom with all its flaws. Okay, you're going to see students in their messy business of getting informed. And it's not always neat and it's not always clean, but I want to state that out front. I teach in a real classroom, I have real students, and it's not clean, okay? But I also would like to, I'm hoping that you'll see that there's a process that each student goes through. You'll get to see where they start, you'll get to see what they do in the middle, and then you'll get to see where they end up. And I hope what you'll see when they end up, you'll see that that's much different from what they did in the beginning, okay? So the beginning is on the front side of that blue sheet, okay? It's got 5 parts. Where they end up is on the back side. And what I don't tell them is that we're going to do something in the middle, okay? We're going to switch topics, we're going to go to a mini unit, we're going to learn some skills. So they're going to pick up some more skills before they go to that last piece. But I wondered if you might just take a moment and read from that, and then after you've read that front page with the five different areas of focus, that maybe we'll come back here to our table groups and you can talk about it. And I'm guessing you might have some questions about it when we get there. So some comments, some questions. And feel free to take notes on that page, and I can provide you digital copies of this as well. Okay. So we had an opportunity to read the handout, at least the front side of it, with the 5 parts there. I wonder if we could kind of come back together, talk about what you noticed, what did you see there, and like any observations, but then also any questions. And I'll let you. Yes.
I have a question, but it's towards the bottom, so I don't know if you want to start at the top and go.
Well, I was going to kind of let you talk about it in your group first, and if you talk about it in your group first, and then we can like share out in the large group. Okay.
One of the hardest things is trying to fit things into, they gave us a blueprint of what is supposed to be taught at what point within a year lesson, for goodness sake. I mean, like you've got 2 quarters, don't you? Is it in 1 semester? And in block system, that's all we've got with those kids. And they're telling us what to teach, like in which weeks or whatever, and that's really difficult, trying to fit within. So I'm just saying, like, fitting something like this in would be quite difficult within that rubric or that blueprint they gave us.
How do I change it slightly so that it fits in my classroom? Like that question that you were having about your classroom. I was trying to figure out, is this feasible on this scale in my classroom? And if not, how do I tweak it so that it becomes my 7th graders?
Is it, Priscilla, do you work like with, because you don't have 7th and then they move up with you to 8th grade, so you wouldn't have the blessing of being able to expand it across unless you collaborated with whoever that 8th grade teacher is.
My students. I agree. You end up thinking regarding issue and evidence, what are the possible varied implications of each piece of evidence? Don't look at the ones that support you, consider them all. So they've done that here. Then down here, they're just doing the same thing again. Sort of, they're coming to a stronger, I guess, conclusion, but I think they're going to say, I put that there.
Right. I think in middle school that will definitely need lots of modeling, because I do think that to see that nuanced difference between the 2 for middle schoolers will be difficult. But I think that modeling will have to show that deeper level of thinking.
Consider all implications and possible solutions. So here you're going to talk about multiple ones. Here you're going to choose the one that you believe is the best. That's already been discussed up here. Is that how you would clarify for them?
Basically don't look at your own opinion. Yeah, your own opinion and change. Right. But to also include the other side. Because to me, if you only argue one side, then your argument's not valid automatically. because you've not included the other.
With eighth graders, and they don't really know what arguing means. They think it's an emotional part.
Like the link doesn't work.
Well, actually, last year, though, this really came through with
You've got and they have a better understanding of
I
it
never
now.
really did have them argue. No.
Let's start with observations. Observations. What do you notice? Anybody?
One thing that I saw, or I think this is what's in here, is like in part 4 under the analysis, it's talking about not simply looking at the implications to support your own position, that it's also including the counter argument. And I think that's important for students to actually take the time to look at the other side, because they may wind up changing their mind before it's all said and done. So I thought that was important.
And so a missing part of this, is the trajectory of a student from the beginning of the school year through that culture of argument into the mini units with those specific skills that they're learning. But then key words there that I might be using are things like complexity. We might be able to, that complicated thing that you just said, absolutely, but I can also cue them to talk about that through that little cue word of complexity. Use the counter argument or multiple counter arguments to then reveal that complexity. Okay. Other thoughts?
I do love that the structure of the report is so reflective of the true research process. I love the research and methods section. In most middle or high school research projects that I'm familiar with, that I've seen personally, I don't think I've seen that other than the bibliography. And it's usually addressed, it's usually taught along the way, and maybe there's some kind of practice. Maybe there's a targeted assessment sometime along the way, but it may not be reflected it may not be reflected in a way that can be assessed as deeply and as thoroughly in the final product. So I think that this section, I just love the way the whole thing is broken down, and I think that the research and methods section would be very effective for students.
I have a question, how would you grade this? How would you,
That is the big $1 million question.
I mean, is it totally subjective, or is it, you know the specific things you've asked for here?
It's very formative. Okay. So by creating those steps, I don't allow them to move on to the next step. I create a large window of time so that we can get depth. But within that large window of time, I okay them to move on to the next step. So I want to see that they have a plan for their research and findings before we actually move into actually what the evidence was. I want them to report on the concrete evidence of what they've gathered before they get into analyzing it, because there's something important there where their bias can lead their evidence collection if I don't really get them to focus on objective evidence and the gathering of it from multiple locations. And also in the plan of the research and findings, I want to see that they have a plan to look into the counter argument that will lead us to evidence from multiple perspectives and analysis that encompasses multiple perspectives before we come to the conclusion. Because many students can gather one piece of evidence and come to a conclusion and say, okay, I'm done. And that, by having those steps, I wanted to outline the journey of becoming informed. And so their process in moving through each of those steps is a journey to become informed. And like I said before, it is very messy. And some of that mess I have to accept. But through the formative process, if they have a research and findings section that embodies multiple perspectives, which is one of the key checkoff points in my head, then I give them full credit for that, total points, to move on then as well. So that's what
So it could be as general as class participation, or how well they've sort of taken on or how much energy they put into it. Or it could be, I'm just saying, if I had to explain what I'm giving the grades for, as like we've been told we have to give 2 a week.
I have 2.5 grids per week.
Yeah,
Do the math on that.
You know, and you've got to sort of make it up as you're going
2.5.
along. You know, yeah.
So do you conference with them? Have a room break?
Constant conferences. There's constant busyness in the room. Again, that is part of the messiness. But I am like early on. I kind of work out in a Google Doc. I work out. Here's the topic. Here's the group. Here's the topic. Here's the group. And so I take notes and I go and try to meet every day with every group. Where are you at? Where are you going next? And then I slip in advice. I slip in suggestions. I refocus. I remind them that it sounds like you might be going down a bias wormhole here, and we might need to like open up and look at other possibilities. Okay, who's looking at that? Okay, what could you look for? Could maybe we split that up and you look at one of those pieces, you look at the other. But another way, like what it feels like a newsroom. That's what it feels like. And I'm the main editor, but I am constantly finding out where we're at, what we're working on, and making suggestions as to where to go next. And that's a formative process. That's a form of assessment. Me moving around looking over shoulders to see what's happening, that's part of that formative assessment process. And I don't want to call it just like subjective, participation points. It's not that, because I have a checkoff list of what I'm going to in my head, and it looks very much like what's on that blue list, but it needs to look like that before we move on.
Do you work with Google Docs? You set up Google Docs for the groups, and you can give feedback that way as well?
They have Google Docs, and so I also use Google Classroom. And so we're a Google school, and I don't know, if you're not in Google School, Edmodo is a free way to get around that. Use EDMODO, Edmodo. Okay. And you can, what you do is that's just the spot where they share their Google Doc with you, and you can go then, like I don't have to search back through my email. I just go to that assignment on Edmodo or that assignment on Google Classroom, and I have a link to every single one of their papers there. Yes?
Is I would take these sections, especially the ones with the questions, and I'd plug those questions into a Google Classroom assignment and have them to answer them, and and before they moved on to the next section. So. And
I give them this handout, but I really try to focus them on the step that they're on. I don't want them to get ahead of themselves. If they rush to that conclusion, it gets in the way of their evidence gathering.
Yeah, like on part 2, I would just put those questions in as an assignment on Google Classroom, and that's where we stay until, individually when they're ready to move on to the next step.
Okay. Last year I started doing Genius Hour, but I only had it planned to do like on Fridays, but it sounds almost like this is like a Genius Hour, a more directed Genius Hour, but you're using your entire classroom time all of the time. So my question was, you said you stop before they do the back and you do a whole mini unit. Are you doing mini lessons on a daily or weekly basis in addition to that, like with research skills and writing skills and things like that? So they're not just having free, like it's not like they come into your room, they start working on this and that's all they do every single day. You are also doing some mini lesson instruction, and then they are also having time to work on it?
Some days we do. Like they come in, and like some of them will come in and they need to go do an experiment in the VOEG shop, and they've already set it up. They just need a note from me, and I get that group in, and maybe even before that bell rings, they're gone. And I've got them checked off that they're present, and they're coming back to me then with evidence of what they've just done. But it's that newsroom thing. Like it's they come in and they might have something that they need to go do right now to complete this, and when we get in the heat of it and they get really wrapped up in it, I feed off of it. I feed off the energy because I want to know what they go find out. I was talking with Deb on the break about I had a group of students who were upset, wanted more options for beverages in the classroom. They were limited to water only, and it could be in a plastic water bottle, or it could be in a water bottle that they've purchased. But it was a constant struggle for me, like to go around and police pop cans on the floor and things like that, like hidden where they could be kicked over. So they actually went through a spill test that they conducted. They got some advice from the science teacher. They went and used the vocational agricultural shop and did spill tests where they were measuring the volume of fluid lost in a 3-second spill on floor level, at the level of the desk, and at head level. So they drop it, count to 3, pick it up, and then they would measure how much of the volume was lost. And then they went through a very diverse series of like types of containers, pop cans, water bottles with the cap off, water bottles with the cap on, McDonald's cups, McDonald's cups. That was one big thing that I fought constantly. They'd come back from lunch with McDonald's cups. McDonald's cup dropped off the desk level, pops the top off, loses 100%. Same thing from the head level. And so they could make the argument that there are some very problematic water bottles, or the little cappuccino glass bottles, those break from desk and head level. So what they found was that the spill-proof, like Camelback, Contigo bottles, lose nothing out all 3 of those heights, and they could make the argument then to the school board that they can they could regulate the types of containers rather than the types of beverages and actually save more, because a water bottle with the cap off, which you take the cap off to take a drink of it, and that's when you're likely to spill it. When that spills on a computer, it's still $1,000 to replace that computer regardless of what type of fluid it is. They could actually save the school money and save the teachers time if students had to have a spill-proof container. So I guess just to emphasize, I had to give those guys time, and they needed it, and they were actually coming back with data, and we could plug that, like they'd have notes and we'd plug it into a table, and during my conference time I'd help them analyze that and talk it through about what that data table was showing. So it's messy, but it's productive and it's learning.
One thing I really love and notice about this, its focus is more on the process than the product, which is atypical to a mini writing assignments. And that prepares students for a career in college or wherever they go, because they have a process and not just an assignment that they try to please the teacher. So I really love that difference.
But it has the best of both worlds. You're very right, but you'll see that in the student samples, and that's part of the reason the detailed research report, it's a mess. It is not something I would want them to turn in college, okay? But it's emphasizing the process, which means when we turn around and flip to the backside, we can emphasize the product. You know, that when you publish something in the newspaper, it needs to be perfect.
Well, and it will be better because they've gone through this. Yeah. You'll have a better product, but you don't just jump into the product in the beginning.
Right. Giving them the time to go through that messy bit of getting informed. Other comments, questions? Yes, please.
My question goes to the research methods. I teach middle school and I teach 6th grade, so much younger demographic that I have. And a lot of my students don't have the access outside of school to do their research and conduct their experiments. And so how would you suggest? So
it's an extended research argument, which means you create a big window of time, and we do it all entirely during our I get 45-minute class periods a day. We do it all in those 45 minutes.
So it's not all outside of class type stuff.
Right. And I want, because it's so process oriented, I want the process to happen. So newsroom or the way I talk about it with my students, I don't use the newsroom analogy because they wouldn't get that, but I use the wood shop analogy. You know, they've got projects that they're working on, but they're not like being sent home to go do their wood shop projects. That we're actually workshopping them in the school at that time. So we workshop writing in much the same way, and they get that. Or when they go down to family consumer science, they're actually baking in class, right? They're not being sent home to go make their brownies. They're actually doing that in class. Well, that's how we do things in here too, and that's how I explain it to them. Yes, please.
Okay, so I know you do it over a quarter. So do you do it every single day, or do you set aside certain days in which y'all work on your extended projects? And
both. Some weeks, and
just kind of depending on how the project's going
and where they're at. Okay. But also through Google Classroom, then I can also, like kids who are in a different stage who might be at a spot where they could go do something else. I can assign other things through Google Classroom. And then the students who were really involved in the workshopping can pick that up in study hall and finish that too. So there's layers. There's days where there are other things. There's days where we might have to do some test prep. So we might take a break and cover something that's really important. I can coach them through some structure or test prep bit of knowledge they might need to have before we take that test next week, but I can still come back to it. And they're constantly thinking about it, right? And then we do take a big break in the middle of it and work on a mini unit. And I shouldn't say it's the middle, it's probably, you go 2/3, and then you take a break and take on an entirely different topic, which gives them a rest because they've spent a lot of time and effort thinking about this. But also I want it percolating. Like I want them to get a little distance from it, to think about it for a second, get some new skills, and then return to it. And that, I think you're going to see a difference in when we look at the student sample. Yeah.
When during the school year do you do this?
Second semester. Yeah. I want to really build up my culture of argument through routine argument practices. I want to teach them some specific skills. I also use the formative assessments available through the College Ready Writers program to really figure out where they're at and what they need next. So I'm really, first semester, I'm spending a lot of time assessing them for what they know about argument, for what they're able to do. And I have a target of the start of second semester to have them all ready to then jump into that.
Okay, I see how this completely fits in with informational text. Do you also, I mean, obviously you're an English teacher, do you also have literature?
I do incorporate literature, but I will say since I've started this work with argument in the study, and I've seen the benefits of the study, I'm much more balanced. I've had to make room in my classroom for nonfiction informative text. And I still do literature. We read plays, we read poetry, we read short stories, we read some novels. But I've had to also like make room for this stuff, this material, because it's important too. And it was the missing component in my classroom, and a lot of the teachers I talked to, nonfiction and argument they're missing in a lot of classrooms.
And this, I mean, that makes sense that you, obviously, the way that you structured the whole program within your school year and within the unit itself.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a bit lost with, I mean, I don't know what Google Classroom is.
Okay. So your school would need to sign on as a Google school. So one way to tell if you're a Google school is if like your school email, if you go to Google to sign into that.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so that you're a Google school. So you should be able to go to classroom.google.com and test to see if that opens up an account for you. And then if you don't have that capability, I would start a conversation with your technology department. And
but we have other places that we've got to put things in. We've got to use Power School now and all those sorts of things. So I just wondered what it was. What is Google Classroom? Is it just a place to put your grades, or is it a place to...
Well, and like I know Rutherford County, we're using Microsoft Office 365, and it has
that's what we've got.
So it'll have some similar functionality.
You have notebooks and collaborate.
And the students join this, and then it's sort of like a blog almost. Like it has a stream of announcements. It has you can do an assignment though. So like we just did the Raven, and they had to
we did a research project. I give anything if we were doing it this way, but a research project, and then at the end of the research project, part of that at the presentation portion of it, they had to create a poem that went along with what they had done. Well, that poem was the first poem that went into their poetry unit, and we just slipped right in the poetry right at the end of the year. So I can see where this would be a possibility.
So that position paper, the one that I do with my seniors, I have a colleague who slips out of that. So like this one, they do extended argument and they move into an op-ed. She comes out of an extended research project, like the typical senior research project, but she's transformed it into an argument, and she moves into slam poetry and has them create a slam poem, and actually they perform it on stage in the school auditorium, but it's on the topic of the research that they've just completed. So that'd be very similar, yeah.
It's great, and like I said, they could either do like some type of poetry. Well, actually the poetry was actually required by all, but then they also had a performance portion of it, and like I said, it all just kind of worked itself.
Something else about that balance though, and I find like the decisions teachers make in rural schools, like percentage-wise, have a really big impact, right? So it all depends on the context of your department, your community, your school. If you're in a school where your colleague teaches nothing but literature and that's the way it's going to be, and you go 50-50, on nonfiction and literature, your students are getting 25% of their material through their high school career as nonfiction. If you are in a school where you and your colleague together decide to go 50-50, then your student's getting 50% nonfiction and 50% literature. So when you make those decisions, you have to consider the flexibility of the context of the conditions in which you teach. So that would be something to think about.
We just got to the bottom. We don't have computers in our school yet, so not on a one-to-one basis. So that's part of the problem. Like,
and we don't either. They're looking into that, but when students are in my class, I can check out a lab. They can access Google Classroom in that way.
yeah, we do that. I mean, I do that.
The beauty of Google Classroom, I think, and I used Edmodo before and loved that, but so when Google Classroom came along, the beauty of shifting to Google Classroom was that it was the integration of all things Google. So Google Docs, Google Classroom. My students make Google Site portfolios, so they have digital portfolios. The docs, even using the spreadsheets, they can turn in the Google Sheets and share those with me when we're tracking data, like with the spill tests. There's just a great level of integration that we can do through that process. And I can track the revision history through the Google Docs and go look at, that's another level of going in and stepping into students' process, is going and looking at that groups.
So would you pull their work up and have it up on the overhead projector, or is this on a personal?
On occasion, there might be reason to do that, absolutely. But for the most part, they might, if I check out we have a laptop lab, if they've checked out a laptop and the group is working around a laptop, I can have them pull up their revision history and we can go back and look at what they're doing there. There's a bunch of diverse, varied ways to approach that.
Do y'all have, sorry to interrupt, do you have Discovery Ed education as one of y'all's tools? Okay, we just got that, and I'm wondering how that would fit in. We've got so many new things, I'm like, how does it all fit?
But also with Google Classroom, I can share links to YouTube, I can share links to, I can post my handout on there with more directions. There's the other beauty of having them turn it in that way is the timestamp, things like that. So I put a packet of yellow paper at each table, and I've given each table a different student project. So I wonder if maybe we can, we've talked about what the process is. Now let's actually step into one group's process. And I am going to turn you loose as a group. You can feel free to mark these up. I have made a website that has all of these handouts. So you're able to access that, and it's available through the College Ready Writers Program website. So don't worry about marking these up. If you're wanting to use this later, or if you're thinking you might use one of these handouts later, it's all available on the website. Feel free to just step in and start reading, talking, and the full process for each of these students or student groups is there. So you'll see their planning and what we're about to talk about next, and the op-ed is also at the end. So it's all there. So feel free, read, talk, and work through that here. I'll give you about 20 minutes.
Would it be a bad thing to just piecemeal it to them and then show them the end on the back end?
Yeah, it's more complicated than that. I think I break off and just prompt them with the first part, and they don't know what the rest of the process is going to look like. And then I give them the rest of it so that they can start to see the vision of it. Sense. But I focus them back, okay, you're on part 2. See what happens in part 3. Don't do what happens in part 3 and part 2.
Yeah.
But there's always this group of students who start putting it all together.
Because as I'm reading this, I'm like, how are we going to keep them from wanting to analyze in part 3?
So then in conferencing, I'll say, hey, hit enter a couple times here. Stick part 3. Now go back to part 2 and finish that, and see that they're separate.
Got it.
So just through the conferencing process. It's messy though.
Could you clarify what op-ed is?
Yeah. So they write letters to the editor of our local paper for this context. But like these folks here at this table have the school dress code. They also submitted their work to the school board for consideration. We had a couple other groups that found other additional decision makers to send theirs to. But the focus is a letter to the editor as assigned on the flip side of that blue sheet. And when they write that, they're limited to 500 words. And I think we were talking earlier that letters to the editor are often very opinion-based when it comes to adults writing letters to the editor. So these student letters actually show up and they get run in the paper. You can tell that they are much more well-constructed than the adult ones because the adult ones are sitting there right next to them. And so what I tell my students is we all have opinions, and that the old saying goes that we're all entitled to our opinions, but that's not entirely true. We're all entitled to our well-informed opinion. And opinions fall apart if you don't have a good argument. And arguments, if the dictionary definition of an argument is, the reason or set of reasons that you have for believing what you believe, your opinion. So opinions fall apart if you don't have a good argument, and arguments fall apart if you don't have good evidence. And so that's a little shift on the letter to the editor that we go about constructing. But there's a mini unit, the College Ready Writers Program mini unit entitled Making the Case in an Op-Ed that helps students see that, but also organize it. And I'm gonna talk a little more about that here in a bit.
So this is just kind of a catch-all for those topics that don't have a specific audience.
Right. But we also want to engage the community in the conversation because the community votes on school issues. And that's been a big thing that the response from the community has been overwhelming. When I go teach Shakespeare in my class, I don't get stopped in the grocery store or things like that. I grew up. I started out as a rodeo cowboy, and I went to college on a rodeo scholarship, and so I still team up once in a while. In May, I stopped at the local arena, and I was getting ready to practice, and I warmed up my horse, and I'm cinching him up, getting ready to get back on, and I had guys riding past me asking me about some of the topics my students were writing about, and wow, that's really cool that they're looking into that. It's about time somebody looked into that. I took my family 20 miles away from the town I teach in. I took my family to a summer community fun day. And so we're watching a parade, and my kids are eating corn dogs, and people are coming up to me on the street talking to me about the topics that the students wrote about. I'm getting cards in the mail from people from 20 miles the opposite direction, thanking me. There were community members publishing letters to the editor in response to the letters that the students wrote, thanking the students for doing that. And I once featured on the student examples page on the website a response from a community member thanking the students and hoping that this happens every year. I wasn't ready for the response from the community. I was kind of worried that the community might not like that the students were looking into this, but it's actually been the opposite. That the kids are bringing this up and they're informing the community members, but also engaging them in the conversation. And so conversations are happening in the community because the students inserted themselves into adult conversations in many cases. So it hasn't been as controversial as one might expect. It's actually been really well received in a very conservative small town community.
Well, and also this would match up really well with our team rubric, professionalism section of our team, where we have to, show our community involvement. So something like this would really stand out.
Yeah, I'm going to flip that community involvement. We were talking about back to where you said your principal would come in and talk to some of your students while the other students were working over here. We were saying if we knew what resources from the community that a certain group needed, we could ask maybe community leaders and that kind of thing to come in and talk to those groups while the other groups are still working on their projects, and the next week bring in somebody else to let them have a little, panel discussion type.
And in a small town, small school context, you can work with your administration to gain some flexibility there. But I actually, because in a small town, we're close to everything. I could send them across the street to the courthouse to go interview the judge. I could send, we'd have to set it up in advance. The sheriff's department is right across the street. The sidewalk folks, it's one that's available on the sidewalk. They were looking at the crosswalks and the sidewalks. They went and found the school resource officer, and he actually came and they found him outside of class, talked to him, and he said, "What period is your class? I'll just come grab you out of class." So he and then another police officer showed up as well. He took those 3 students out into the street and they just started looking at crosswalks, and he's talking through them. Like, first he gives them another resource to go to the Montana Code Annotated, go find the laws for this, but you'll see that, you know, all crosswalks are supposed to be 6 feet, especially around schools. And then he's got a tape measure and hands it to them, and they measure, and it's 3 feet wide. And so here's their school resource officer, a police officer, saying, we need to fix this, and I need you guys to go communicate that to everybody, right? And so that happened a lot. You know, the judge is dealing with the ramifications of drug use in our community. The judge has in his past life been a suicide awareness and prevention advocate. So, you know, the students are learning from him what's important to understand about suicide awareness. The county nurse was really helpful, and the students would go sit down with her and talk through issues in the community. Some of the rural road issues, they'd actually go talk to the head of the Department of Road Maintenance and learn the opposite view as to why it was a real challenge maintaining our roads, and the funding and the resources that weren't there in order to do what the community wanted them to do, while at the same time state law is telling them that they have to do it.